Hi, welcome back to the Fastball Profits. My name is Rob Scooter. Thanks for joining me tonight. We're going to do the Week 15 Start Sit video. Now, if you're looking at this video, that means you probably have made it to the second round of the playoffs. Congratulations. I hope you continue to do well. For me, I've been blessed. I've got 4 leagues I'm in. 3 of them I had a bye. I did play last week in the playoffs. Going into Monday night, I needed a big game from Kenyon Drake to advance, and he had a huge game for me, so I did advance. So I hope you guys are doing equally as well. Now, we're going to get to some things for you to consider for your Week 15 Start Sit video, but before we do that, I want to say thank you to all you who have subscribed, watched our videos, shared, continue to do that. This was the first year we did it. We started back in the fall time, the end of August, beginning of September, me and my son. But we're going to continue taking the input that we've had from you guys to improve our product, our website, the quality of our videos, how we can get you better information, even how we answer questions. So it's been a fun year, but I really look forward to next year. We will be doing some off-season videos though, so keep an eye on those. We have a contest that we run in the playoffs this year. So if you're out of fantasy football going into the postseason, we have some stuff that you can do. Now, one of the things that we've always tried to do is we try to stay away from hunches and feelings. I know it's tough. I get there. I have them too. But I have found that, yeah, every once in a blue moon, those hunches and feelings will pay off. But most times, the best thing for you to do is stick to 100% credible information, things you can qualify, quantify, things that you can measure. If you stick to good information, 9 out of 10 times you're going to do all right. And at the end of the year, you'll be competitive. The other thing that we always say in these videos, you need to contextualize this information. I can give you some things, some food for thought, but ultimately every league is different. Roster sizes, scoring, things like that. I don't know who's available on your waiver wire. I don't know who you have on your bench. So you have to take and you have to contextualize this. And the other thing that we really try hard to do is answer any questions you may have in the bottom of the video. If you ask us specific questions, we'll try to give you as much as we can detailed answers. Now, the one thing I would say, last week we missed a couple of questions that were pertaining to Thursday's game. I didn't see till Friday or Saturday. For that, I'm sorry. So here's what we'd ask you to do in the future. If you have a question and if you have players involved in that question that are playing in Thursday's game, at the very beginning of your question, in bold letters, put the word Thursday, and then we'll know to get to that question first. The other thing I would tell you too is try to get your questions in before Sunday morning. I work Sunday mornings from about 9 to 12. I'm not available to answer any questions. So once again, let's get to the first game of the week that we're going to cover. The Broncos versus the Colts. Let's look at the quarterbacks in this game. Well, Trevor Siemian plays the Colts to give the 7th most points to quarterbacks. At this point, honestly, I don't feel like you can trust him at all. I wouldn't start him. He's got 12 touchdown passes to 14 interceptions for the year. His quarterback rating has dropped from his first season as a rookie at 84.6 to 74.4. He's just somebody that you can't trust at this point. I would stay away from, especially in Week 15 of the playoffs. Another guy is Jacoby Brissett. Well, last week he played in blizzard conditions, so no matter what took place in that game, that was really an anomaly. You have to throw that out. Just a weird game because of the conditions. There was snow everywhere. Going into this week, though, he's still playing Denver. A Denver defense that's very solid against the pass. In fact, the last 2 weeks, the Denver defense is playing a lot better. And they got their shutdown cornerback, Aqib Talib, was back last week. And so there's so many reasons why I would say starting Jacoby Brissett's a bad idea. Besides a 3-game stretch where he played well, for the most part, he hasn't been a quoted quarterback this year. I know Colts fans will be excited to have Andrew Luck back next season. Let's take a look at some running backs here. Well, last week, Frank Gore had a huge week. Now, he's what we would call volume play. His yards per carry haven't been very good. He's a lot older. He's 34 years old. He's at the downside of his career. Heading into last week, as it turned out, we said going into the game, we felt like he was a volume play, but not a great play. He had 37 carries in that game. It was actually 36 carries. It was a career high, and the reason why that was the case is with the snowy conditions, they didn't throw the ball much. They really stuck to the run. But even with his 36 carries, a career high, he did have over 100 yards. His yards per carry was still only 3.6, and so he's what we call volume play. For a lot of you, he did well, but he didn't have a great game per se. Going forward, he's going to be their lead back. We know that at this point. He's going to be the guy that's going to get a bulk of the carries. Typically, he's going to say 15 to 18 carries. I would expect that this weekend for him. Before last week, he had 17 carries 3 weeks in a row. But now he's playing a Denver defense that allows the 6th fewest points to running backs. He's what we would call touchdown dependent at this point. I would say he falls into that running back 3-4 category. Frank Gore as a volume play is not great. You could play him, but lower your expectations and consider him a running back 3-4 this week. As far as Denver's running backs, you look at Anderson, Charles, and Booker at that point. Last week, Anderson led the team in carries, but he was in a blowout win, so that allowed them to run the ball a lot. He had 22 carries, but he only had 48 yards on those 22 carries. So that's a terribly unproductive day. This whole situation is a running back by committee. If you had to pick one running back, I would give the slight edge to Anderson. It doesn't matter they're playing the Colts who get the 12th most points to running backs. With that said, I really wouldn't trust any of them at this point. If it really comes down to one that you had to choose, I would say Anderson's a slight edge over Booker, unless it's a PPR league, and then Booker has a slight edge. But none of these guys I would trust. Week 15, I would stay away from all 3 Denver running backs. None of them are good, even though the matchup is a decent matchup. As far as wideouts go in this game, you look at T.Y. Hilton. This guy is so talented. If anybody has missed Andrew Luck, it's got to be this guy. I know that he's broke a lot of owners' hearts. Now, he always has a potential because he's so talented to have a huge blow-up game, and he typically has been an all-or-nothing receiver this year. In fact, in 3 games this year, he's had 505 total yards receiving. He's averaged 168 yards per game in those 3 games. But in the other 10 games, he's only had a total of 306 yards, averaging just over 30 yards per game. So he's so hit or miss. And I think going against Denver, who's very solid against the pass with Aqib Talib back, I would say that he's a wide receiver 3 to 4. I would sit T.Y. Hilton. There is a chance he could blow up, go for 150 yards and 2 touchdowns, but he just as easily could go for 2 catches and 20 yards. So I would sit him at least till Andrew Luck is back. He's not a receiver that you can trust. Another guy in here I would look at is Demaryius Thomas. Now, he's playing the Colts to give up the 8th most points to wideouts. Now, for the last 5 games that Trevor Siemian has started, Demaryius Thomas has caught a TD pass. And he's averaging over 10 yards per target during those same games. So he's averaging 10 targets per game over that same stretch of time. Now, the one thing you have to consider, Trevor's not a good quarterback, but he seems to be looking Demaryius Thomas's way a lot. So you look at that once again. He's had 4 TDs the last 5 games that he's been the quarterback. During that same stretch of games, he's had over 10 targets per game from Trevor. So Demaryius Thomas is a wide receiver that you can start this week, and I feel pretty good about that. I would say Demaryius is a wide receiver 2. Emmanuel Sanders, another guy who's got a lot of talent there, but he's really disappeared the past 4 games. In fact, the past 4 games, he's averaging just under 2 catches per game and 13 yards. It's been terrible. He's very talented, and I know he has a good matchup. But until you have another quarterback there, as long as Trevor is the quarterback, I simply don't see a rebound game. I would need to see a rebound game even before I would trust him at this point. I would sit Emmanuel Sanders. As far as the tight ends go, I would sit all Denver tight ends, and I would start Jack Doyle. Now, he's playing Denver, who gives up the 5th most points to tight ends. He had a quiet game in the snow game, but like we said, you can't throw that all out the window. That was an ugly game for everybody. That was an oddity. He's going to be used a lot in this game. I expect he's going to have a big game. He is a must-start. Jack Doyle is a guy that you need to start in this game. As far as kickers go, McManus is a fair play and a good matchup, and I would probably sit Adam Vinatieri. He's had 2 weeks in a row where he's been bad, but Jacoby at quarterback playing a good Denver defense. It could be a tough matchup for him. He could just easily get shut out. I would sit Adam Vinatieri. I would sit Andy's defense, and I would start Denver's defense. They went through a few weeks there where they just didn't look like the defense of old, but the last 2 weeks they're starting coming back into form. They're playing really well, and they play Indianapolis, who gives up a lot of points to opposing defenses, so you could start Denver's defense this week and feel pretty good about that. The Bears versus the Lions. Well, let's look at Matthew Stafford. The Bears give up the 6th fewest points to quarterbacks. The Bears' defense is pretty solid, especially in the passing game. Now, some of those numbers were padded against bad quarterbacks. Now, last time Matthew faced Chicago, he threw for 299 yards and 2 TDs. Now he plays Chicago at home, so that's going to bode well for Matthew Stafford. Thing that's going to help him also is he had that banged up hand last week. There's a question mark whether or not he could play. We end up playing through it. That gives him one whole more week to get healed up. I think Stafford is a good start this week. He's had a very solid year, and they have no real running game there. Last week, Amir Abdullah was inactive, and so they went to Theo Riddick, and Theo Riddick is really just a pass-catching running back. Really, this is just a passing offense at this point. They don't really have a lot of solid running backs there. With all that, I think that Stafford's a good play. Let's look at Mitch Trubisky. The rookie quarterback is starting to figure things out. If you look at the progression, he's starting to play better, but it's still not a great offense, and he still has only 6 touchdown passes in 9 games, and he's playing a Lions defense that's solid against the pass. Their best wideouts, Inman. There's many reasons why you would stay away from Mitch Trubisky in this game. Another reason why I would stay away from Mitch Trubisky is if you look at the Lions, their defense, if they have a weakness, it's against stopping the run. I think they allow the 2nd most points to running backs. And so I think you're going to see a heavy dose of Jordan Howard and Cohen in this game. I wouldn't trust Mitch Trubisky. Stay away from him. As far as running backs go, I would sit Amir Abdullah. And Theo Riddick, let's take a look at Theo Riddick. Well, last week I mentioned that Amir Abdullah, he was inactive. Now, it said that he was inactive because of a neck injury, but he did have limited practices all week. A report came in from Ian Rappaport that had said the reason why he got sat was more because of the way he had played in his performance than it was his neck injury. So this week they play the Lions. The Lions play the Bears. The Bears get the 17th most points to running backs. Last week in that position where Theo essentially was the starting running back, he had 2 rushing touchdowns along with 6 catches for 64 yards. So here's where we look at Theo Riddick. Really, his value is contingent on Amir's health and what the coach's take is on this. So this week I'm going to be really watching and see what the Lions coach say in terms of who their back is, what his response is in terms of Amir Abdullah, his role moving forward. then I look at Theo Riddick. He really his values in PPR league. So in a PPR league, if Amir doesn't start, I would say Theo Riddick is a running back 2. In standard leagues, he's more of a running back 3. Once again, contingent on the fact that Amir will be inactive. If Amir ends up playing, that bumps him down. I would say if Amir plays in standard leagues, don't even start Theo. In PPR leagues, he moves down to a running back 3. Jordan Howard in this game plays Detroit. As I said earlier, gives up the second most points to running backs. Last time he faced Detroit, he gouged them for 15 carries for 125 yards and a touchdown. Now, what teams have done against the Bears, they've really loaded the box to try to shut that down. It doesn't matter, even though they've been doing that, there's been a few games where he's been ineffective, yet Jordan Howard is a very good running back. He's had 5 games over 100 yards, and so he's a must-start going into this with a great matchup. Now, I would be a little leery. I have Jordan Howard. I'm going to play him this week in a keeper league, and I certainly want to advance. But I think even loading the box, they've shown that they can still run the ball effectively. He is a must-start. Like I said, I'm a little leery with Jordan Howard simply because he's not highly involved in the passing game, and so if they shut that run down too early, sometimes he's a non-factor. For that reason, he's a must-start as a running back 2, borderline running back 1 play. Tariq Cohen, I know he had a big week last week. A lot of people are wondering, okay, he's a guy that we can play. I know early in the year, the guy had a lot of love from owners. We said, okay, hold on for a second. They need to caution that enthusiasm. Part of the reason why he hit a big game last week is they blew out the Bengals, and late in the game they're allowed to turn to Tariq Cohen to give him a lot of carries. This is still Howard's team. He's going to get a bulk of the carries, and if you look at Cohen, he's been inconsistent all year. In fact, if you look at it before last game, in the previous 6 games, he only averaged 3 carries per game. So he has some value in what we call deeper PPR leagues. Other than that, just in the deeper PPR leagues, he's still only running back 3 in those leagues. Once again, talking just about PPR leagues. When we say deep leagues, we're talking about leagues with 14 teams or deeper. So I'd probably stay away from Tariq Cohen. Definitely start Jordan Howard. As far as the wideouts in this game, let's look at Marvin Jones Jr. He had a fairly quiet game last game in what was a good matchup, so he had an off week. But if you look at the year, he's still on pace for 1,000 yards. He has 10 touchdowns, receiving touchdowns this year. Last time when he played the Bears, he went out, he had 4 catches, 85 yards, and a touchdown. You look at 6 of his last 8 games has been extremely effective. I think Marvin Jones is a guy that you have to start at this point. Until he has a couple games in a row where he has struggled, I would start him as a wide receiver 2 to 3, depending on your league size and scoring. Golden Tate. Golden Tate had a good week last week. He's really Matthew Stafford's favorite target. He's a safety valve, a guy that he trusts on a lot of the shorter routes. You see him hit him a lot on 3rd down. He's a guy that if you look at his high catch totals, in fact, he's on pace to get 90 catches, over 90 catches this year. That'd be the 4th year in a row that he's over 90 catches for Detroit. The downside of Tate is he has lower yardage totals. So in PPR leagues, he's a wide receiver 2. In standard leagues, he's what I would call wide receiver 3. So look at Inman and Wright, the wide receivers for Chicago. Well, Wright had a huge game last week, but before that he had 7 very unproductive games. Inman had a TD, but he only had 2 catches for 21 yards. Neither one of these wide receivers can be trusted. I would stay away from both of them this week. As far as tight ends go, I would sit Bears tight end Adam Shaheen. He's played decent in limited time, but there's not enough consistency there to trust. He's had 2 good games, but for 3 other games, he's really disappeared. Now, Eric Ebron is another tight end who struggled early in the year, but he's really picked it up the last few weeks. In fact, last game, he had 10 catches for 94 yards. He's a low-end tight end start this week. As far as kickers go, I would start Prater. I would sit Chicago's kicker. As far as defenses go, I would start the Lions defense. The Bears have a good defense. They're not a great play, but they would be playing maybe what we call low-end defense play this week versus Detroit, but I would probably lean towards not starting them if I was you. Chargers versus the Chiefs. Let's look at quarterbacks. Alex Smith. Well, last week he had a great matchup. Now, Kansas City actually moved the ball at will against the Raiders. And if you actually watch the game, what you found is Alex Smith missed 5 touchdown passes by literally inches. He was inches away from having 4 to 5 touchdown passes. They moved the ball very well, very effectively. Like they say, it's a game of inches. So he could have had a huge game. He still had a decent game in terms of yardage and moving the ball. But now he plays the Chargers. Chargers give the 4th fewest points to quarterbacks. The Chargers defense is playing very, very well right now. You look at that, you got Bosa, Ingram, Hayward. This defense is good and getting better against the pass. I would advise sitting Smith unless you have no other options this week. That Chargers team, in my opinion, my humble opinion for what it worth, I think they're going to win the West. I think they're the team to beat. And so there's a lot of reasons why staying away from Alex Smith would be good at this point. Let's look at Philip Rivers. Last week, Kansas City shut down Derek Carr and the Raiders. That's probably more of the ineptitude of the Raiders than it is Kansas City's defense. They give the 8th most points to quarterbacks. Last time they played them in week 3 through 3 picks. But if you look at week 3 when they played and Philip Rivers won, things were a lot different back then. The last 4 games, Philip Rivers is really starting to play well. During the last 4 games, he's got 8 touchdown passes to 0 interceptions, and during that same 4 games, he's having 337 passing yards per game. I would start Philip Rivers in this game. Take a look at the running backs in this game. Let's look at Hunt. Well, last week we pushed Hunt really hard. There's a lot of people that were really on the border. A lot of people had kind of pulled back, didn't want to start, and they didn't trust him anymore. And we pushed and we pushed. Not only I started this video, in a lot of the questions people asked, we really promoted, say, hey, you got to trust this guy. He's still having a great year. Going into the game, his average yards per carry were 4.9. He's using the passing game. You need to play this guy. We hope you followed our advice, because for those that did, he rewarded you with a huge game of 25 carries, 116 yards, and a touchdown. Now, you get through a dry spell in the year, but he still has a really healthy yards per carry, 4.9. He's got 42 catches on the year. It keeps him involved, even when they're struggling running the ball, even if they fall behind and have to throw it. It keeps Hunt involved in the game. And you're starting him against a defense. If the Chargers defense has a weakness, it's run defense. They allow the 17th most points to running backs, so they're great against the pass, but they're vulnerable against the run. You need to start Hunt in this game. Let's look at Melvin Gordon. Well, he plays Kansas City, who gives up the 8th fewest points to running backs. Gordon hasn't had a great year. His yard per carry only 3.7, but he is the lead back. He gets the bulk of the carries, and he has 10 touchdowns on the year, so he's a must-start as a running back too. As far as Austin Eckler goes, he's really not starting at this point. He showed some potential. He's a third down back. He comes in relief, but he doesn't get enough volume to trust. You need to sit Austin Eckler. As far as the wideouts go, let's look at Keenan Allen. Plays Kansas City, who gets the 2nd most points to wide receivers. So Keenan Allen's been playing really good, and now he has a great matchup, which is unfortunate because I have to face him in a game this week. The last 4 games, Keenan Allen's been playing out of his mind. This guy's putting up amazing numbers. He's a must-start, high-end wide receiver 1 in this game. Start Keenan Allen. As far as Tyrell Williams, he has a good matchup, and he's had 2 TDs the last 3 games. But if you look at 7 of the last 9 games, he's really a non-factor. So he plays as a wide receiver 4. He has potential, but he's a risky play. They don't just use him consistently enough to trust. He could easily go out and have 4 or 5 catches for 100 yards, or he could easily go out for 1 to 2 catches for 15 to 20 yards. So he's a guy that's a risky wide receiver 4 play. As far as Tyreek Hill goes in this game, Kansas City gives up this, Oka. Bump ahead there, sorry. I feel like Tyreek Hill in this game. Tyreek Hill is a guy that if he plays, going to probably see a lot of Hayward in this game. He's a quality receiver. He stretches the field. He gets low targets, though, Hill does. So he's a little risky. He's what many would call wide receiver 1, but I kind of bump in the wide receiver 2 category simply because he doesn't get the targets. He does have a tougher matchup this week against Hayward. So I would say he's a guy that you probably want to start, but I would start him as a low-end wide receiver 2. Now let's go to the tight ends in this game. Let's look at Travis Kelce. Now, he's playing the Chargers, who are tough against tight ends. In fact, earlier this year when he played him, he had 1 catch for 1 yard. Kelce really struggled in that game. With that said, is anybody out there who owns Travis Kelce honestly going to sit him? The only way that I'd even consider sitting him is if I have Gronkowski, and I doubt that you have Kelce and Gronkowski. He's far too talented to sit. Here's what you're going to do. You need to start him, but lower your expectations for Travis Kelce this week. As far as Hunter Henry goes, he plays Kansas City, who gives up the 7th fewest points to tight ends. Now, Henry's had 3 productive games in a row where he's looked pretty good. He's involved in the offense. He's been pretty consistent. He's not the caliber of a Kelce or a Gronkowski, so you may want to consider sitting him if you have other options, although most of you probably don't at this point. He's a good pick, but he's not a great tight end, so I would say that he's somewhere outside around the 10 to 14 range in terms of tight end rankings. I predict about 3 to 4 catches for 40 to 50 yards. A TD would be a nice bonus in this game for him. As far as kickers go, I look at Butker and Coons. Both of them are playing well. They have okay matchups, so they're fair plays. Both of those are kickers that you could start in this game and be okay. As far as defenses go, you need to start the Chargers defense right now. They're playing really well. They scored double-digit points in fantasy, I think, 4 of the last 5 games, and I would sit Kansas City's defense. The Bills versus the Dolphins. Look at Jay Cutler. This is exactly what Jay Cutler does. So he'll struggle, and then he'll go out there like he did against the Patriots, and he'll throw for 263 yards and 3 TDs. But just about the time you figure, okay, this guy's turned a corner, you can trust him, he'll go and he'll stink it up for 3 to 4 games. He'll just crush your spirit. Now he's playing Buffalo, gives up the 3rd fewest points to quarterbacks. With that said, his inconsistency, the fact that Buffalo Bills are good against the pass, I would sit Jay Cutler. Look at Tyrod Taylor in this game. Tyrod Taylor is questionable. He's playing Miami, gives up the 17th most points to quarterbacks. Although they just played, the Dolphins just played the Patriots and Tom Brady. And Tom Brady and the Patriots struggled against them. Now, I don't know if that was just one of those fluke games or what was going on there. Yet I know a lot of you out there have a love affair with Tyrod Taylor. A lot of the fantasy people just love him out there. I don't like the guy. I don't trust him. I think he's inconsistent. If you look at 3 of the last 8 games he's played, he's had single-digit points scored for quarterback. Can you in Week 15 in the playoffs, when you need your team to be at its best, afford to have a quarterback that ends up single-digit points scored? Probably not. For me, he's just a guy that I simply wouldn't trust at this point. Another thing you need to consider why you couldn't trust him is a good chance that Kelvin Benjamin is going to miss the game and be out. He is playing at home. Weather could be an issue again, so I just wouldn't risk it. Peterman may start in his place if he's injured. Stay away from him. He's been horrible. As far as running backs go in this game, let's look at Michelle McCoy. So he's playing Miami, gives up the 8th most points to running backs. McCoy is a very good running back. He's using the passing game. He has 48 catches on the year. He's been good all year long. He's a guy that you need to start as a running back 1. Look at Kenyon Drake. We've been plugging Kenyon Drake for quite a while now. In fact, right after the Ajayi trade, a lot of people were big on Williams, and we kind of went on and said that we felt like Drake was just a much better pure runner. We said this is a guy that's got a legitimate running back 1 skill. We really pushed Drake hard for a while there, and I think he's come out and proven that he is the true running back 1 there that we kind of felt he could be. He's had back-to-back 100-yard rushing games. This is his job at this point. He's not going to lose him. When Williams comes back, he might spell him for a few carries here and there, maybe on 3rd down or in passing situations, but this is Drake's team moving forward. In fact, I see a lot of fantasy or dynasty value in him going into next year. Now he's playing Buffalo, who gives up the most points to running backs. So Drake this week is actually a running back 1 start. Been doing really well. His yards per carry have been great. And now he plays Buffalo, who gives up the most points to running backs. Kenyon Drake is a running back 1 this week. As far as wideouts go, I would sit all Bills wide receivers. Benjamin's questionable. He hasn't clicked on the offense yet anyways. Now let's look at the Bills. Now the Bills give up the 9th fewest points to wide receivers, so the Bills are tough against wide receivers. Parker, I don't know what's happened. I'm going this year. A lot of people thought this was a sophomore year, or not sophomore, but that 3rd year where a lot of times wide receivers in the 3rd year will begin to take off, really blossom into their own, and he's just taken a couple steps backwards. Right now he holds no fantasy value at all. I would sit him, and I also sit Stills in this game. Now let's look at Landry, Jarvis Landry in here. He's got 8 touchdowns on the year. He's our most reliable wide receiver. Now his yardage totals are often very low. So in standard leagues, I would say Landry's a wide receiver 3. In PPR leagues, you could bump him up to wide receiver 2, Jarvis Landry. Look at the tight ends. Look at Clay or Thomas. None of them can really be trusted at this point. If I look at the 2 guys between Clay and Julius Thomas, Thomas is a better play of the 2. I would try to find somebody else to start if you can. Somebody that you can trust to be more reliable in this game. As far as kickers go, neither are bad starts, but they're kicking in inclement weather. They're kicking in cold, gusty conditions of Buffalo. I'm not sold as either one of them is a reliable option, so I'd probably avoid both kickers in this game. As far as defenses go, both Miami are good starts, with the Bills' defense being a better start over the 2, but they both are decent plays this weekend. The Ravens versus the Browns. Look at quarterbacks Deshaun Kaiser. Well, he's playing Buffalo. No, I'm sorry, not playing. Playing the Browns, who give up the fewest points to quarterbacks. Kaiser has been really bad all year. He's played a little bit better as of late, but when I say better, it's still not playing very well. He's a guy that you just need to sit. Don't even begin to consider him at this point. Playing against the Ravens. The Ravens are very good against the pass. Sorry for my misspeak there. I should have said at the beginning that the Ravens allow the fewest points to quarterbacks. Sorry, my notes were mistaken there. So stay away from Kaiser, playing a great passing defense. He hasn't been good all year. Don't even think about it. Joe Flacco. Joe Flacco plays the Browns to give the 6th most points to quarterbacks. Flacco's having a bad year at this point. Lately, he's been playing a little bit better. In fact, he's at 269 yards passing on average the last 2 games with 2 touchdown passes. So he had some slight improvement. But he's still just now finally hit it where he has 13 touchdown passes in 13 games. This is a guy who's not lighting up by any stretch. If you're desperate, he's a very low-end plug-and-play. Even then, I don't think he's worth risking it. There's got to be other options out there, in my opinion. I would stay away from Joe Flacco also in this game. As far as running backs go, let's look at Isaiah Crowell. The Ravens gave up the 11th most points to running backs. Now, as we've been pointing out lately, Isaiah Crowell has been playing much better of late. In fact, if you look in the last 6 games, his yards per carry are 5.17. So he's running hard. He's running effectively, looks explosive. And they've been using him a little bit more in the passing game. So Isaiah Crowell is a guy that we had kind of pushed last game. He went out, had over 100 yards, looked really good. Here's another matchup for Isaiah Crowell that looks good for him. I would start him as a running back too. Duke Johnson in this game, he only has value in what I'd say deep PPR leagues. And even then, in deep PPR leagues, he's only a running back 3 to 4. Alec Collins in the game. Let's look at Alec Collins. He plays the Browns to get the seventh fewest points to running backs. Don't shy away from Alec Collins. This guy is playing very well. He's got 5.1 yards per carry for the year. He's got good size. He's no longer in a timeshare at this point. For a while, it looked like a running back by committee. Now, Woodhead and Allen will get the occasional carry. They're going to sit Collins so he can get a rest from time to time, maybe third down, things like that. This is Alec Collins' team. He's going to get a bulk of the carries, and he's looked great at this point. Last week, he played the Pittsburgh Steelers, who going into the game had allowed the third fewest points to running backs. That didn't slow him down. In that game, he had 18 carries for 120 yards, and he had a rushing touchdown. Thing that's been nice about this trend is early in the year, he was running the ball very well, but near the goal line, he wasn't getting any carries, but now he's getting the goal line carries. He got 5 TDs the last 4 games. He's become a very legitimate running back too. Alec Collins, you need to start him. Look at Allen and Woodhead as far as running backs go there. Both those guys have fallen into what I would call role players. I know Allen last week salvaged 2 goal line touchdowns, but he's only averaging 6 carries the last 3 games per game. Woodhead steals some of his targets, so both of those take away enough targets and carries from one another that they devalue to the point when I wouldn't trust Woodhead or Allen in this game. As far as wideouts go, let's look at Josh Gordon. It only took him 5 quarters before he finally scored his first touchdown since not playing in 2014. We talked about how talented he was. This guy's got all the talent in the world. Going into next year, if he stays out of trouble, I predict that he'll be in the top 10 as far as preseason wide receiver rankings go. He's that good. One thing that's holding him back right now is not his talent, but the team that he plays for. Kaiser's not a very good quarterback. If he had an average or above average quarterback, he'd be lighting it up. Now he plays the Ravens, who allow the 4th fewest points to wide receivers. So if you look on paper, the Ravens are good at shutting down wide receivers. But the one thing that we need to consider is one of their best corners, Jimmy Smith, is out. Since he's been out, that number has been going up week to week. They've been allowing a lot of points to opposing wide receivers. In fact, if you look at Adams, Hopkins, and Brown, have torched them lately. So start Gordon as a wide receiver 2. He would be a wide receiver 1 if Kaiser wasn't the quarterback. But start Josh Gordon and feel confident in that start as a wide receiver 2. As far as Corey Coleman goes, through the last 4 games, he's been solid, but he faces a good pass defense. Gordon's the number 1 guy. Kaiser's the quarterback. This makes Coleman a wide receiver 4 play at this point. As far as Macklin and Wallace go, Wallace has been the better of the 2 the last 5 games, but that doesn't say much. Neither one of them put up very good numbers. The Ravens like to run the ball a lot, and they like to use their backs in their passing game, and they keep to shorter, high percentage throws. Stay away from both wide receivers if you can. As far as tight ends go, David Njoku and Benjamin Watson. They both have good matchups in terms of the opposing defenses, how many points they allow to tight ends. David has been inconsistent at times. I would probably sit him, even though he's got a lot of talent. He's just too risky. Now, Watson is a great start against the Browns. Benjamin Watson, a guy, plays for the Ravens, got a wonderful matchup. He plays the Browns, who allow the most points to tight ends. Last time he faced him, he had 8 catches for 91 yards. I would start Watson in this game. As far as kickers go, I would actually start Tucker and sit Gonzalez. I would start the Ravens defense, and I would sit the Browns defense. Vikings versus the Bengals. Let's look at Case Keenum. He had another solid start. It wasn't a great start. He did have 2 interceptions, but he threw for 28 yards, 2 touchdown passes on the day. The one concern that we're having right now, and I'm a Vikings fan, so this is concerning me, is the offensive line is beat up at this point. That might explain why they struggled running the ball. They had a hard time protecting Case Keenum in that game. Now he plays the Bengals, who allow the 13th fewest points to quarterbacks. Now, what does bode well for Minnesota and the Bengals? At this point, the Bengals are out of postseason consideration. They're not going to make the postseason. They really seem like they just packed it in last game they played versus the Bears. Another thing that helps Case Keenum is that game's going to be in Minnesota. So I look at Case Keenum, how he's played, look at the Bengals, the way they're trending, the fact that the game's in Minnesota. And I would say Case Keenum is a safe play who has a high floor but a low ceiling in this one. As far as Andy Dalton goes, he plays the Vikings with all the 7 fewest points to quarterbacks. They're playing them in Minnesota. There's going to be a lot of crowd noise there. He had a bad game versus the Bears. I would tend to sit Andy Dalton in this game if you can. As far as running backs go, let's look at Cincinnati's running back. Let's look at Mixon and Bernard. Well, playing Minnesota, who allows the fewest points to running backs, so right from the get-go, that doesn't bode well for either one of them. The Vikings are very stingy to opposing running backs. Now, the one thing that's funny about that is they allow the fewest points to running backs, yet last game, Jonathan Stewart tore them up for 100 yards and 3 TDs. But you take that away, that was probably an anomaly for the most of the year. They've been extremely consistent at shutting down running backs. Let's take a look at who's going to play well. Mixon's missed a couple games with concussion. If he's healthy, if he's ready to go, he will be their starting running back. This team is looking to rebuild. They're looking to the future. They want to know who they have. They're going to let him get the carries in that one. Another reason why Mixon will be the starting running back if he's back is he was playing better before the concussion. So if he starts, you need to sit Giovanni Bernard. If Mixon does play in the game, you could start him, but only as a running back 3, no higher. You could play Bernard as a running back 3 in standard leagues. If Mixon sits, he would be a running back 2 in PPR leagues. He's very actively used in the passing game, but that's only if Mixon sits this game out. Then you look at Latavius Murray in this one. Well, the Bengals allow the 7th most points to running backs. So going into last week, we actually cautioned. We said don't be too optimistic. We know that Latavius Murray had been playing really well, and the Vikings have played well. But going into the game, we had our concerns playing a very tough Carolina run defense on the road, playing on grass. We fully expected that he would struggle, and he did that. Now, going into this week, we fully expect that he's going to recover. Now, the one concerns that we are having is everything seems to trend right, that he would get back on track this weekend, but the offensive line injuries to the Vikings are a concern. So here's what you need to see. If you're a Latavius Murray and you're wondering if you should start him, you need to watch the injury reports come Friday. Just look and see how healthy the offensive line is for the Minnesota Vikings. If it's healthy and they're starting, then you can go ahead and play him. If those guys are still out, if they're banged up, then I would say that Latavius Murray is questionable. So here's kind of how this would shake out for me. If he's healthy, start Murray as a running back 2. If he's banged up, I would sit Murray. If he's banged up, I would sit Murray, and I would start McKinnon as a running back 3. And the reason why I would do that is McKinnon's better in the passing game. And if the offensive line's beat up, what they're going to do is they're going to get the ball, the case's hand a lot quicker to avoid pressure. It means bigger days for Jarek, McKinnon, and for Rudolph. A lot of times they'll hit their tight ends, their running backs, and shorter passing routes to protect the quarterback. So if the offensive line is healthy, start Murray as a running back 2. If the offensive line is banged up, you need to sit Murray and start McKinnon as a running back 3 in this game. As far as the wideouts go, let's look at Stephon Diggs and Adam Thielen. Well, the Bengals gave up the 3rd fewest points to wide receiver. Diggs' value has really fallen on hard times with the emergence of Adam Thielen, which is I'm a big Stephon Diggs fan. I think he's got a lot of talent, but I love Adam Thielen also. He's played wonderful. So look at Diggs, where he's at right now. He's a wide receiver 4 this week. Try to sit him if you can. Look at Adam Thielen. Adam Thielen, a legitimate wide receiver stud at this point. This guy is playing so well. He does lose value this week based on matchup. I would start him as a wide receiver 2 this week. As far as A.J. Green goes, the Vikings are good against the pass, and Green's going to face Xavier Rhodes. Now, Xavier Rhodes has been very good at shutting down opposing teams' number 1 wideouts. So you need to start Green because he's far too talented to sit at this point. He's too good to bench. And you see that when he faced the Bills and the Steelers earlier this year, both of those teams were good at shutting down wide receivers, and yet he exploded. So he's a guy that's far too talented to sit, but I would say Green's not a wide receiver 1. I would say he's a wide receiver 2 this week versus Minnesota Vikings and Xavier Rhodes. I would sit all other Bengal wide receivers. As far as tight ends go, I would start Kyle Rudolph. He's had 4 TD in 3 games, but don't expect a lot in yards. If you look at his numbers this year, his yardage totals are very low. He's what we call touchdown dependent at this point. He's been pretty good. He's been getting a lot of looks in the red zone, but beyond that, there's a whole lot of value, so you can start him. But just remember, he's no Gronkowski, and he's no Travis Kelce. He is touchdown dependent. I would say he's a low-end tight end, too. I would sit Tyler Kroft in the game. Minnesota allows the 3rd fewest points to tight ends. I would start Forbath, and I would sit Bulk, the kickers. I would start the Vikings defense, and I would sit the Bengals defense. Let's look at the Saints versus the Jets. Look at the quarterbacks. Well, Bryce Petty's going to be replacing McNown, who's out for the year with a broken hand. They're playing in New Orleans. You need to sit him. He's not a good quarterback. There's a million reasons why this is going to be a disaster for the Jets team in New Orleans there. Sit him. As far as Drew Brees go, he plays the Jets, who allow the 4th most points to quarterbacks. I would start him for sure. As far as running backs go, you've got Mark Ingram. Now, he's playing the New York Jets, are tough against the run, but it'd be a mistake to sit him right now. Right now, between Alvin Kamara and Ingram, those are 2 running backs that you need to play. I would start Ingram as a running back 2. Now, let's look at Alvin Kamara. Now, last game, he left, had a concussion, but he'd have 10 days to recover, and everything's trending towards him starting at this point. Everything would look like he's going to play. You need to start that rookie stud at this point, Alvin Kamara. As far as Forte and Powell in this game, they're a running back by committee. They split carries. But with Bryce Petty at quarterback, I would sit both backs at this point. I think what's going to happen is they're going to load the box, put a lot of pressure on the quarterback, try to shut down the running game. This could be a disaster. I wouldn't be all that surprised if the Jets get shut out in this one. If you have to start somebody, out of those 2 running backs, Forte or Powell, I guess I would start Forte, but he's a running back 4 this weekend. As far as wideouts go in this game, Michael Thomas plays the Jets, who get up to 6 most points to wide receivers. Michael Thomas has really returned to wide receiver 1. He's played at a high level again. If you look at the last 4 or 5 games, he's a must start. Look at Ted Ginn, his value, sorry. Look at Ted Ginn in this game. His value's really dropped a lot as of late. I think what's happening there is Willie Snead's been getting more targets. He's getting more time on the field, and that's taken away from Ted Ginn's value. So I would avoid Ginn if you can. As far as Robbie Anderson goes, Robbie Anderson had been playing great. He moved into that wide receiver one conversation. He'd been consistent. He had a breakout year. Unfortunately, with McCown going down, really hurts his value. He looks to be a wide receiver 3. As far as Javon Curse goes, I would sit him with McCown out. As far as tight ends in the game, I would sit all tight ends in this game. I would start Lutz. I would sit Catanzaro. And I would start the New Orleans defense. In fact, I think New Orleans defense is going to be a nice play this week. I would sit the Jets defense. The Giants versus the Eagles. So we got Eli Manning. Now Eli Manning had a good first game the last time he played the Eagles. Now last time he played Philadelphia, he went out, threw for like 366 yards. He had 3 touchdown passes, so he looked good. But you have to remember things were a lot different back then. They had Odell Beckham still. They had Marshall. And Philly's defense is just playing a lot better as of late. They're not playing as well as they are now. In fact, if you look at it, they allow the 9th fewest points to quarterbacks. Eli's not playing well. Things have really switched since the first time that they played. I would avoid Eli Manning if you can. As many of you know, Carson Wentz is out for the year, tore his ACL. That means Nick Foles is going to be the quarterback moving forward. Now, Nick Foles has a sweet matchup this week. Playing the New York Giants, who allow the 2nd most points to quarterbacks. Now, if you look at Nick Foles, he's had some success in the league. In fact, in 2013, he had a year for the ages. He had 27 touchdown passes to only 2 interceptions. Looked like he's going to be a perennial all-pro quarterback there. Obviously, he's not. He's turned out to be a backup quarterback. But I still think that he's a decent play in a very good matchup. If you're desperate, if you lost Carson Wentz and you need to find a guy, Nick Foles might be your 1-week replacement. I would trust him this week. As far as running backs go, look at Jay Ajayi. Now he plays the New York Giants, who give the 5th most points to running backs. Now many felt last week that Ajayi, that was going to be his breakout week, that he was going to move into that lead role, get a bulk of the carries, and he really did that. He got 15 carries, the most carries he's had since he's been in Philadelphia. Since he's been in Philadelphia, his yards per carry have been 7.0. He's playing great. Now, he will be hurt by the fact that Wentz is out. Obviously, defenses are going to load the box now. That's going to hurt them a little bit. But I would imagine if I'm Philadelphia, what I'm going to want to do is establish the run, take pressure off of my quarterback, and I think you could see him get at least 15 to 20 carries this game. I would start him as a running back too. I would say LeGarrette Blount. He looked brutal last game. He's a backup at this point. Unless Jay Ajayi gets injured, I would sit him. Let's look at Gallman and Darkwa in this game. Philadelphia gives up the 2nd fewest points to running backs, so I would sit all New York running backs. They share carries. Their offense is bad. Both those guys fall into the running back 4 or 5 category. As far as wide receivers in this game, look at Alshon Jeffrey. He's got 8 touchdowns on the year, but he's got lower yardage totals, so he's getting in the end zone. He saw a lot of activity in the red zone. But Carson Wentz likes to spread the ball around a lot. A lot of good quarterbacks do that. That's why they're effective. They hit multiple targets. They're not predictable. Oftentimes, what will happen, not always, backups will come in the game, and oftentimes they will zero in on the number 1 wideout, give them a lot of targets. Foles coming into the game actually might help Alshon Jeffrey's value. With that said, we'll have to wait and see how that plays itself out. Most likely, Wentz's departure is going to hurt Alshon Jeffries. So I'd say Alshon Jeffries moves down to a wide receiver 3. Look at Nelson Aguilar. Nelson Aguilar had played well the last 2 weeks. He was kind of getting everybody's radar, but now with Wentz being out for the year, I would say sit Nelson, which is unfortunate because he'd been playing better. He sits as a wide receiver 4. As far as Sterling Shepard goes, he'd been playing very well as the number 1 wideout with Eli at quarterback. We expect he was going to rebound last week, but he didn't. He's really struggled. Now they play Philadelphia, who allows the 13th most points to wide receivers. Sterling Shepard is a very talented 2nd-year wideout. He's the only real wideout they have there. He's going to become the favorite target of Eli Manning, most likely in a game that the Giants will be playing from behind. So don't let last week scare you. Sterling Shepard's still a decent play as a wide receiver 3. As far as tight ends go, you got to start Evan Ingram. He plays the Eagles, will give the 15th most points to tight ends. He's startable, a tight end in maybe the 8 to 12 range. And then Zach Ertz. Plays the New York Giants, who get the 2nd most points to tight ends. Even with Foles at quarterbacks, you need to start Ertz. It doesn't matter. He's a good start this week as long as he's back healthy and playing. As far as kickers go, I would start Elliott. I would sit Rosas. As far as defenses go, I would start Philadelphia, and I would sit the Giants. Washington versus the Cardinals. Let's get Kirk Cousins. He had a bad week last week. Had a really brutal week, and you know what? I'm not too worried about that. Even going into that game, if you watch our start sit video, we told you that he's going to have a rough matchup versus the Chargers. As we had said previously, that Chargers pass defense is very, very good. We expect that Kirk Cousins will rebound this week. He's played in the Cardinals to give the 12th most points to quarterbacks. This week he runs about the 12 to 14 range. That based on your scoring system, of course, that's going to fluctuate, but Kirk Cousins is a decent play. As far as Blaine Gabbert goes, he looked good 3 weeks ago against Houston. He looked decent against the Jags, but each week he's playing worse and worse. He's looking like the Blaine Gabbert that we all thought he would be. I would sit him at this point. As far as running backs go, you got Samaje Perine. He's playing the Cardinals to get up the 9th fewest points to running backs. The Cardinals are stingy against the run. Now, if you look at Samaje Perine, he'd struggled all year. His yards per carry were terribly low, but then he exploded for 2 games where he ran the ball very well. It looked effective, but now the last 2 games he's came back down the earth again. He has a tough matchup. He's purely what we call volume play, a running back 3. Now, you need to also watch the injury report with him, too. He's a little banged up. Look at this here. You got Kern Williams. Now, it sounds like Adrian Peterson's going to miss another game with a neck injury. He might be done for the year. We'll have to wait and see. With that said, the last 2 weeks, he's played respectable. In fact, in the last 2 weeks, Williams has had 170 yards on 36 carries for 4.7 yards per carry. Now he plays the Redskins, who got up the 13th most points to running back. So Williams is a guy that is a good start out there this week. As far as wideouts go in this game, you got Larry Fitzgerald, who plays Washington to allow the 8th fewest points to wide receivers. He'll be facing Josh Norman in that game, who is very good. But Larry's really the only trustworthy wideout they have there. I would lower his value from wide receiver 1. This week, I say he's a wide receiver 2 when you start him. As far as the other wide receivers there for the Cardinals, you got J.J. Nelson, Jerron, and John Brown. Sit all those guys, none of them that you can trust. As far as wideouts for Washington, you got Jameson Crowder. Now, the Cards allow the 10th most points to wide receivers. Now, the one concern I have there is the Cards are vulnerable to opposing wide receivers, but typically the number 1 guy gets seen by Patrick Peterson, so that brings down the value of the number 1 wideout. I think that lowers the value from Jameson Crowder. He's a wide receiver 3 this week. As far as the other wide receivers this game goes, you take a look at them out there. You got Doxson. You've got Grant, whatnot. None of them see enough targets to really trust them, even though statistically it would look like going in this game that the wide receivers will have some success. It's really hard to pin down of those other remaining wideouts on Washington's team who you could trust. Therefore, I would stay away from all those guys. As far as tight ends go here, you got Ricky Seals-Jones. Now, he plays Washington, who gives the 4th most points to tight ends. Now, Ricky is still a rookie. It's hard to trust him, but he is a sleeper play in deep leagues. He's got a great matchup, and he's looked good in limited play. As far as Washington tight ends go, you got Jordan Reed, who's went on season-ending IR. He's done for the year. That leaves Vernon Davis. Vernon Davis had disappeared some weeks. I know a couple weeks back he had a great play. A lot of you started him, and he put up a 0 for you guys. That's terrible. But there's been other weeks where he's been good. He had a TD last week, and now he plays the Cardinals, who go up to 17th most points to tight end. So he's a low-end tight end start this week. Vernon Davis is somebody that a lot of you need to consider starting this week. As far as kickers go, I would sit Rose and start Dawson. Both defenses are fair plays, but they're not high-end plays going into this game. Panthers versus the Packers. So let's look at quarterbacks. Look at Cam Newton. Plays Green Bay, gives up the 12th most points to quarterbacks. Cam hasn't played great this year. No, the one thing I would say here, it's not on my notes, but a lot of people were huge on Cam Newton, especially after that MVP year. And we cautioned, if you look at our preseason rankings last couple of years, we predicted a downswing. He's a great athlete, but he's not a great quarterback. And because he's a great athlete, his ability to run the ball, his legs have kept him in the fantasy talk. It's his legs that have kept him considered a top 12 weekly fantasy quarterback. On the year, he's got 585 rushing yards and 5 TDs. So you can start him in this game. Got news today. Aaron Rodgers has been cleared to play. Everything's trending towards him playing this week. I know Packer fans are excited. Us Vikings fans are a little more apprehensive. We're hoping he's going to be done for the year. Now, Aaron Rodgers is a future Hall of Famer. He's great. So if he starts, you need to play him. That's just a no-brainer. He's too good to pass up. But you need to realize this. If Aaron Rodgers plays, you're going to have to start him. But he's playing the Panthers defense, who's good against the pass, and he could be a little rusty at this point. But Aaron Rodgers sounds like he's going to play in this game. Let's look at the running backs. Look at Jonathan Stewart. He plays the Packers, who got 10th most points to running backs. Now, if you look at Jonathan Stewart early in the year, he was brutal. You can see that this guy's at the very end of his career. His yards per carry have been going farther and farther. At one point, I think it hit a career low of 3.1 yards per carry. But now he's been picking up. He's broke over 100 yards rushing 2 of the last 4 games. Last week, he had 3 touchdowns. He's actually had 5 touchdowns in the last 3 games. And If you study Jonathan Stewart over the history of his career, he notoriously has always started slow the first maybe 6 to 8 games and finished the year strong. And we're seeing that play out again. He's getting stronger as the year goes on. I would say because of his matchup and how he's playing, he's a running back 3 this week. I look at Christian McCaffrey. He only has value in PPR leagues at this point. He's a low-end play. With the emergence of Stewart running the ball better, that really devalues him at this point. As far as wideouts go in this game, Panthers give up the 13th most points to wide receivers. Look at Jordy Nelson. If Hundley ends up starting the game, if for some reason Aaron Rodgers doesn't start, it's Hundley. You need to sit Jordy Nelson. He's been brutal since Hundley took over at quarterback. If Rodgers starts, you need to immediately start Nelson. In fact, I would say if he starts Nelson, immediately becomes a wide receiver 2, borderline wide receiver 1 this week. If you take a look at Jordy Nelson's year, in 5 games where he played and Aaron Rodgers played together, because I know he missed a game because he was hurt, and of course, as you know, Aaron Rodgers has been hurt, but in the 5 games that they played together, he had 6 receiving touchdowns. So Nelson is a favorite target of Aaron Rodgers. You need to start him. As far as Adams goes, Devontae Adams. Last week, we kind of we're not sure to start. For some of you, based on who you had, we kind of advised maybe sitting him, although he has maintained his value with Hundley at quarterback. Going into the last game, he was having a brutal day till a very late score by him, pushing overtime, and he scored again in overtime to really save his day. He has maintained his value. Obviously, that's going to continue to be effective. If Aaron Rodgers comes back, he's a wide receiver 2. Either way, whether it's Rodgers, whether it's Hundley at quarterback, doesn't matter. Devontae Adams is a wide receiver 2. Devin Funchess, last week he had a tough matchup, and he proved again why he's a legitimate number 1 wide receiver. He's a must-start in a sweet matchup this week. As far as tight ends go, you got Greg Olsen. You need to sit him. He needs a game. He needs to prove that he's back and he's healthy, can play. In the 2 games he's played since he's been back, he has 1 catch. Need to sit him until he's proven he's healthy again. Sit all Packers tight ends. As far as kickers go, I would sit Crosby. I would start Gano. As far as defenses go, I would start the Panthers defense if Hundley ends up getting the call. If it's Aaron Rodgers, I would sit both defenses. Jaguars versus the Texans. Let's look at quarterbacks. Blake Bortles. Now, Bortles plays Houston, who allows the second most points to quarterbacks. The development of D.D. Westbrook is another thing that's really helped, and D.D. Westbrook has really developed into a quality wide receiver. They talked about him in the preseason, how good he looked in camp, how wonderful he got hurt. He's been back for 4 weeks now. Each week, he's increased his yardage totals. Last week, he had over 80 yards and a touchdown, looked very good. All that is increasing Blake's value. He has a wonderful matchup this week. I'm not a huge Blake Bortles fan, but I think this week he's a good 1-week plug-and-play. If you're strapped for injuries, or if you have bad matchups, or if you're in a league that you have to start 2 quarterbacks, Blake Bortles is a guy that you could start. As far as Houston quarterbacks go, maybe Savage, might be Yates. I'm not really sure. I didn't look much into it. I'll tell you why. It doesn't matter. They're playing the Jaguars defense, who is very, very good. Sit whoever starts for Houston. Let's look at running backs. Lamar Miller. Really, at this point, without better quarterback play, it makes it very easy. If I'm playing the Texans, I load the box. I make my point to shut down the run, and I also bring a safety over to help my corner lined up against Hopkins. That's how I would play them. And until they have better quarterback play, it really devalues Lamar Miller. He's no better than a running back 3 this week. Leonard Fournette. Leonard Fournette has been decent this year. He's playing Houston, allows the fewest points to running backs. The Texans allow the fewest points to running backs. So I would say that Leonard Fournette is a running back 2 with lower expectations, although you're going to have to start him because, let's be honest, he is their go-to guy there. As far as wideouts go, you've got DeAndre Hopkins. This guy is a stud. It doesn't matter. Teams have been bringing 2 or 3 people over. They've been getting double coverage. This guy has been playing out of his mind. Now, he does have a terrible matchup against the Jaguars, who allow the fewest points to wide receivers. So you've got to start Hopkins. He's way too talented, but because who he's playing, he's a wide receiver 2 this week, yet he's too good to sit. Look at Marquez Lee. He's playing Houston, who allows the 7th most points to wide receivers, and Westbrook also. Both those guys are reasonable plays, both Westbrook and Lee. You can start them as what I say borderline wide receivers 3. As far as tight ends go, Steven Anderson, not a good play. I would sit Lewis in this. As far as kickers go, I would sit the Houston kicker and start Josh Lambo. I would sit Houston. I would start the Jags defense. You have to start the Jaguars defense, obviously. Let's go to the Seahawks versus the Rams. Let's look at Russell Wilson. Now, last week he had a tough matchup versus the Jaguars. I know a lot of people were scary, and we said he's probably far too talented to sit, and yet you need to really be careful with this one. Yet, even in a tough matchup, he still went out there and had 3 touchdown passes. Russell Wilson is a must-start right now. He's matchup-proof, as we say. As As far as Jared Goff goes, he's playing Seattle defense that early in the year was really good against the pass, but now without Cam there, with Sherman out for the year, that defense has lost some bite to it. You need to start him. Expect a line somewhere around 250 yards, 2 to 3 touchdown passes for Jared Goff. He's a guy that you can start. As far as running backs go, look at Mike Davis. The Rams allow the second most points to running backs, so the Rams are vulnerable to the run. And I think right now with Mike Davis, they really found their lead back. They struggled for a while there. They had Carson early in there, looked pretty good. He got injured. Lacey hasn't been good. Rawls hasn't been effective. They tried McKissick for a while. But ultimately, they settled on Mike Davis. He's become their guy. He's had 16 carries for 64 yards. He followed that up with 15 carries for 66 yards. He ran very well. He's using the passing game. This week, Mike Davis is a running back 2 that you can start. As far as Todd Gurley goes, he's so involved in the passing game right now. He's got 51 catches on the year. He's got 13 touchdowns on the year. That even though Seattle's tough against the run, you need to start Todd Gurley. Don't make that mistake. I know somebody asked me last week, and by the way, there's never a bad question. Ask me anything you want, but they want to know if I would dare start Todd Gurley, and to me, that's an absolute yes. I don't care who he plays. Doesn't matter if he plays Houston, who's number 1 against stopping the run. He's using the passing game. He gets a goal line carry. Start Todd Gurley. As far as wideouts go, sounds like Robert Woods is going to be back this week. Before he got injured, he was Jared Goff's favorite target before the injury. In fact, before the 3 games before the injury, he had one game. He had 4 catches, 70 yards, 2 TDs. He followed it up with 8 catches, 171 yards, and 2 TDs. And then he played Minnesota and Xavier Rhodes, who's usually a shutdown corner. Before he got injured in that game, he had 8 catches for 81 yards. So he's a wide receiver 2 in this game. I would say Cooper Kupp, he's really taken off. 2 of the last 3 games had over 100 yards, although he loses some value with Woods coming back because Woods will get some of those targets. So I would say Cooper Kupp is a wide receiver 3. I would sit Sammy Watkins now that Woods is back. As far as Baldwin goes in this game, I would start Baldwin as a wide receiver 2. Now last week in a tough matchup versus the Jaguars, we told everybody that he's actually done fairly well against top-rated cornerbacks for some reason. Why, I don't know, but he's been fairly successful. In a tough matchup, he still went out and had 78 yards and a TD, so I would start him this week. Let's look at Richardson and Lockett. These guys, if you look at their volume, if you look at their targets, they've been so inconsistent. Now they're playing a good Rams defense, allow the 5th fewest points to wide receivers. I would really sit both of those guys. I wouldn't trust either one. It's certainly a possibility that one of them could go and have 100 yards and a touchdown, but it's hard to trust who that's going to be. As far as tight ends go, you need to start Jimmy Graham. He's got 9 touchdowns on the year. His catches and yards have been lower, so he's what we call touchdown dependent, but with 9 touchdowns on the season and with the way Russell Wilson is playing, you need to start Jimmy Graham. I would sit the Rams tight ends. I would start Greg Zuerlein, and I would sit Walsh. I would sit both defenses at this point. If you had to start one of the 2 defenses, the Rams are probably better of the 2 defenses. Although with Russell Wilson playing the way that he's playing, I probably wouldn't start them either. Probably the game of the week right here. Patriots versus the Steelers. This is one. If you're going to pick one game to watch, this is the game that I'd want to sit down and watch besides my Vikings, of course. Should be a wonderful game. Let's look at the quarterbacks in this game. Let's look at Tom Brady. Tom Brady's had 2 bad games in a row. Now, I know for a lot of you, you're going to get a little nervous because it is the postseason. You need a big game. You need to win. But he's still a must-start because he's still Tom Brady. This could be a very high-scoring game. I wouldn't be surprised to see the over-under around 60 or so. Look at Ben Roethlisberger. That's a great play. He plays New England, who allows the 7th most points to quarterback. Ben Roethlisberger, he had one bad game early in the year where he had 0 touchdown passes to 5 interceptions. A lot of people said this guy is done. But you take that one game out of there, he's having a great season. Start Ben Roethlisberger. As far as running backs go, Le'Veon Bell is a must-start. It doesn't matter who he plays. He's another one. His yards per carry aren't great. Doesn't matter. He's a huge volume play. They use him in the passing game. They use him in the running game. You need to start Le'Veon Bell. Look at Dion Lewis in this. Last game, he struggled to run the ball a little bit. But that was kind of the first time in a while. Now, we don't know why he struggled to run the ball. Sometimes offenses just have weeks where they struggle. Maybe it was Gronkowski being out. That certainly could be the case. Having him back is going to boost that whole offense. It'll help Tom Brady. It's going to help the running backs. It's going to help everybody there. So I would start Dion Lewis as a running back 3. As far as Rex Burkhead goes, he had another touchdown last game. That gives him 5 in 3 games. Rex Burkhead is a guy that you need to start. Although he's got lower value simply because him and Lewis split carries. So I would see that Burkhead's about a running back 3. Another reason why I lower the value is Steelers are good against the run. They actually allow the 9th fewest points to running backs. So I would start those guys, but temper your expectations. As far as wide receivers go in this one, you got Antonio Brown. He's a must-start every week. It doesn't matter who he faces. You need to start Antonio Brown. The guy's amazing. Take a look at Juju Smith-Schuster. He'll be back from suspension. Now he's playing the Patriots, who allow the eighth most points to wide receivers. I'd say Juju is a borderline wide receiver 3 to 4 this week. I would sit Bryant. As far as wide receivers for New England, I look at Brandon Cooks. Brandon Cooks has had 2 bad games in a row. They have so many mouths to feed in that offense. It's really hard to trust him. I would say you need to start him, but he's no better than a wide receiver 2. Really, here's how they function and how he's using that offense. They use him to stretch the field. That's what they use Brandon Cooks for. He stretches the field, and you look at Gronkowski, and the running backs are using the passing game on the shorter routes. They're kind of more the possession receivers in there. So Cooks will have that game where he'll blow up for 100 yards and a couple touchdowns, but then he might have a couple games where he's a non-factor. But he's too talented to sit at this point. Let's take a look at Chris Hogan. He came back last week from a shoulder injury, and he was targeted once. We expect he's going to improve on that this week, but he's still playing a very tough defense. So I would say Hogan's a wide receiver 4 play. Probably want to sit him. As far as tight ends go, you need to start Gronkowski. Obviously, that's a no-brainer. You start him every week, no matter who he plays. Then you got Jesse James. Now, Jesse James actually last week had a huge game. He had 10 catches, 97 yards. But before that game, his statistics really resembled that of a backup tight end, not somebody you could depend on. So I would stay away from him. I would start Boswell and Gostkowski, both kickers, and I would sit both defenses in this game. So the Titans versus the 49ers. Let's look at Jimmy Garoppolo in this game. Well, last 2 games as he's taken over as a starting quarterback there for the 49ers, he had 293 yards passing. He followed that up with 334 yards. That team has won 2 games in a row. He's playing very well. Now he faces the Titans, who allow the 17th most points to quarterbacks. He's a nice plug-and-play. If you're somebody who lost Carson Wentz, he's a guy that you may need to pick up and play. He could be a fix for you this week. As far as Marcus Mariota goes in this game, he's playing San Francisco, who allows the 3rd most points to quarterbacks. So great matchup for Marcus Mariota, right? Unfortunately, Marcus is having a bad year. I think on the year right now, he's got 10 touchdown passes to 14 interceptions. He's had a lot of quarterback-friendly matchups early in the year where he failed to put up good numbers. I would sit him this week. They're just too scary to play him at this point. As far as the running backs go in this game, you got Carlos Hyde. Hyde plays the Titans, who allow the 6th fewest points to running backs. With that said, even though he's not a great back and he's got a tougher matchup, he's still the lead back. He gets the bulk of the carries. In fact, last week, against the best run defense in the NFL, he had 78 yards and a touchdown. So Carlos Hyde is a guy that you need to consider running back 2 this week. As far as DeMarco Murray, plays San Francisco, who allow the 3rd most points to running back. So DeMarco Murray's got a good matchup. Unfortunately, Murray has been dreadful this year. But he's still getting double-digit carries on average. He used in the goal line. He gets a goal line carries. He's using the passing game. And so DeMarco Murray, because of the matchup, I would start him as a running back 3. Let's look at Derrick Henry in this one. Now, Derrick Henry's had touchdown 2 weeks in a row. He's run the ball better this year than DeMarco Murray, but for whatever reason, the Titans refuse to give him a bulk of the carries. So in the meantime, since he's getting limited carries, I would say even though he's got a great matchup, he's still no better than a running back 4. As far as the wideouts go in this game, let's look at Marquise Goodwin. Marquise Goodwin, if you look at 7 of the last 9 games, he's averaging over 90 receiving yards per game. Now he's got Jimmy Garoppolo at quarterback, who's a good quarterback. This is only going to improve Goodwin's value. Because he's got a lot of yardage, but oftentimes his targets and catches are lower, Goodwin's value is higher in standard league, but it's lower in PPR leagues. He's a wide receiver 3 this week. Let's get Rashard Matthews. Well, until Marcus Mariota turns it around, you're really hard to trust Rashard at this point. You can't trust Davis or Decker in this game. They're not consistent enough to trust. I would sit them, even though they have a good matchup. As far as tight ends go, I would sit San Francisco's tight end. I would start Delaney Walker. Really, Delaney Walker is the best weapon for Marcus Mariota. It's not a great play, but he sits kind of in the 8 to 12 range as far as tight end rankings go. As far as kickers go, both kickers are worth starting this game. Gould and Suckup are good. I would sit San Francisco's defense, and I would start Tennessee's defense. Actually, Tennessee's defense, they're the reason why you're in the playoff hunt at this point. That defense is really playing well. In fact, they've had 20 sacks in the last 3 games. They've had 2 games where they have 8 sacks in each game. I would start them. The Raiders versus the Cowboys. Let's look at Derek Carr. Plays Dallas, gives the 10th most points to quarterbacks, so this is a good matchup for him, right? Unfortunately, Derek has really struggled even in good matchups this year, and I really like him as a quarterback. Wonderful brother in Christ, but not somebody that you can trust at this point. Another concern that we have for him in this is Amari Cooper got to play last game. He re-injured his ankle, and he left the game, so things are trending in the wrong direction at the wrong time for Carr. I would recommend looking elsewhere, even though the matchup would tend to think it would be a good matchup for you. Let's look at Dak Prescott. Last week he exposed a bad New York Giants defense. Now he's got 5 touchdowns in the last 2 games, though 0 interceptions. So it seems like after struggling for 6 games, he's back on track. He's been kind of a confusing quarterback. The first 6 games this year, he looked great. He went through a stretch where he struggled. Now he's back on track again. Now he's playing the Raiders, get the 12th most points to quarterback. So I would start Dak Prescott this week. As far as running backs go, I would start Marshawn Lynch. He's actually run the ball pretty well right now. He's run the ball effectively. Authorities yards per carry going up. He looks like he's back in beast mode again. I would start Marshawn Lynch. As far as Alfred Morris goes, when he plays the Raiders, get up the 16th most points to running backs. So Alfred Morris has actually run the ball pretty well while Ezekiel Elliott's been out. Last game, as you probably know, Rod Smith went out and had a huge game. Well, his emergence in that offense has really pushed Morris to be a running back 3 this week. Look at Rod Smith. A lot of people are excited. He's probably going to be a huge pickup for a lot of you out there. Now, Rod Smith had a great game, but don't be fooled in that game. He had a huge game, but Morris is still the lead back this game. Now, next week after that, it's going to be Ezekiel Elliott. But even last game, we saw Morris got a bulk of the carries, and that's going to happen again. Morris is going to be their first and second down back. He's going to get 15, 20 carries per game. The value for Rod Smith is going to come in PPR leagues. And so he's got a running back 3 value in this game, Rod Smith. If you're in a PPR league, Rod Smith's value becomes a running back 2. As far as wideouts go, I would start Des Bryant. He's had a couple good games in a row. He's had some touchdowns. Still has yet to break 100 yards, but he's getting the looks in the red zone. As far as Amari Cooper goes, we have to watch and see the injury report this week, see how he did. He re-injured his ankle, as we had mentioned. And he'd been struggling all year. He had one huge game, but beyond that, he hasn't been that great. They play the Cowboys, who give up the 5th most points to wide receivers, so that's another one would appear to be a good matchup, but there's so many question marks surrounding Amari Cooper. Michael Crabtree. Now, he's had 24 targets the last 2 games. That's a lot of targets. Unfortunately, he can only turn those 24 targets into 111 yards. It's been very disappointing. Now, he does have a good matchup, and he may be the #1 wide out there, especially if Amari Cooper's out, so I would say that Crabtree sits as wide receiver 3. As far as tight ends go, Jason Witten has a good matchup this week, but you can see the age has caught up to him. Now, he scored touchdowns 2 weeks in a row, yet he's only managed 1 catch in each of those games, so he's really touchdown dependent. I would sit him. He's just not enough volume there to trust. As far as Jared Cook go, last week we said that he was a good play, someone that you could trust to start. He produced with 5 catches, 75 yards, and a TD. But it has been hard to trust him because he'll go out and have 2-3 games where he'll be on fire, then he'll disappear for a couple games. I would say he's a fair play this week against a Dallas team that allows the 12th most points to tight ends. I would start Bailey in this game, but I would sit kicker Tavecchio. And I would probably sit the Raiders defense, most definitely, actually. And I would probably sit Dallas defense if you can. If you have to play defense, down to the defense to play in this one, although they're not a great play. Falcons versus the Buccaneers. Well, let's take a look at Matt Ryan. And so he's another one. Started the year horrible. Last 6 games he played well. And then the last 2 games looks like he returned to his early season form where he has struggled. And so which Matt Ryan are we going to get? With the real Matt Ryan, please stand up, right? That's what we're kind of thinking at this point. Well, he's playing Tampa Bay, who allows the 12th most points to quarterbacks. It's going to be hard for a lot of you to avoid starting Matt Ryan in this game. Last time he faced the Buccaneers, he threw for 317 yards. So I would start Matt Ryan. I think he's going to be a decent play this week, but I think you always have to remember he's not playing like he was in last year. This certainly is not the MVP type caliber that we saw him playing last year. So I would start Matt Ryan. Jameis Winston hasn't looked great. Last game he looked brutal, in fact, but he often salvages his fantasy day by playing from behind. This defense isn't very good. They fall behind early. They turn the ball over a lot. So they're oftentimes going into the 3rd quarter already down by a couple touchdowns, which means they have to throw the ball all the time. A lot of garbage time statistics. In fact, if you take a look at it, he's reminded me an awful lot of Blake Bortles of a few years ago, where Blake Bortles was a good fantasy quarterback, but not a very good quarterback. He might be a nice plug and play for somebody out there who needs to fill in behind Carson Wentz. I actually have him in a league, and I'm vacillating on whether or not to start him. As far as running backs go in this game, we look at Freeman. Last week we said you should start Freeman. We hope you did. He had a good week. I would sit Coleman in this one. I would sit Doug Martin in this game. I would start Barber. Now, going into last week, we were huge on Barber. We said, watch and see what's going to happen. If Martin's going to come back, if he does come back, is he going to be the starter? He did came back. The coach did start Martin, but after he fumbled in the second quarter, the coach sat him. Not only he fumbled, but he'd been ineffective. I think he had 10 carries for 26 yards. He'd been brutal, following his trend for every game except for game one. He had struggled. Barber came into the game and out-touched him, but not only out-touched him and out-carried him, but really outperformed Martin. Going forward, we expect the Bucs to stick with Barber moving forward at this point. So I like Barber in this game as a running back 2-3. As far as wideouts go, let's look at Mike Evans. He's been a big disappointment for a lot of you owners out there. So what do you do with Mike Evans? Is it time to sit him at this point? Well, one, he's very talented, and he's in a game that there may need to be a lot of throwing. It could be a very high-scoring game. Certainly, he's not wide receiver 1 anymore, but he's a wide receiver 2. That's where I would look at Mike Evans. He's just too talented to not start. So I would start Mike Evans in this matchup as a wide receiver 2. I wouldn't start any other Buccaneers wideouts. I would start Julio Jones. Julio Jones has been another one who's been disappointed at times. But last time he faced Tampa Bay, he had 12 catches, 253 yards, and 2 TDs. You need to start him. And I would start Sanu in this game. I think he's a wide receiver 3 play. As far as tight ends go, I would sit Cameron Brate. You look at O.J. Howard, the rookie tight end, first-round pick, who they drafted to be highly involved in the passing game. He's starting to take over. We can see that he's getting more and more involved. In fact, 3 of the last 4 games, Howard's over 50 yards receiving. So at this point, you can't trust Cameron Brate, but neither can you trust O.J. Howard because you still have Brate in the picture there. So both of those tight ends, really, I wouldn't trust. Hooper's been hit or miss. I would sit him. As far as kickers go, I would start Bryant, and I would sit Tampa Bay's kicker. I would sit the Tampa Bay defense, but I would start Atlanta's defense in this game. So that's a lot of information out there for you. Apologize for the misspeak. I guess I should probably slow down the videos a little bit maybe and give you a little more information, but I don't want the videos to be too long. I want to get the information out there to you guys. One thing I would say, if you have any specific questions for us, leave us at the bottom of the video. We'd be more than happy to answer them for you. God bless. I wish you the best this week, and I hope you win in fantasy football.